Doc Hudson, better known as the Hudson Hornet in the Pixar movie Cars, claimed that he kept his racing identity a secret from the residents of Radiator Springs because he wanted to put that part of his life in his rearview mirror. That might not be the entire story, though. There's a really interesting theory that, if it's true, could reveal a devastating secret about Doc's so-called glory days that nobody even suspected. And if the alleged secret does prove to be canonical, then it reveals the Hudson Hornet was a fraud all along. Now, the idea that Doc Hudson, the Piston Cup record holder, was a fraud might seem like a baseless accusation. However, after rewatching the Cars trilogy, it actually looks like he cheated his way to the top after all. Not much is known about Doc's history as the Hudson Hornet, aside from the fact that he was a Piston Cup winner who holds the record for most wins in a single season, which was 27. That was until the third installment of the Cars franchise was released, and fans got to see Lightning McQueen learn all about Doc's history as he traveled the road to train like him in hopes of continuing to race in a more modern era. And in Cars 3, there was a lot of odd information, and when you put it all together, sort of seems to suggest that Doc was hiding a dark secret that was connected to his so-called glory days. According to the movie, Doc started racing back in 1951, long before it was super popularized and funded the way it is now that McQueen was racing. It was an era where cars raced on dirt tracks, and many racers made a name for themselves doing activities that weren't considered legal, like smuggling moonshine. However, despite not being involved in any openly nefarious activities like the other cars, Doc still managed to make a name for himself. And on the outside, it might seem like his success was made possible because he was sporting a better engine than the other racers, but there could be a lot more to it than that. If you look at one of the stickers on Doc's hood, it shows that he was equipped with twin H-power, which refers to a dual carburetor system that was built for efficiency. This would certainly help the Hudson Hornet perform well on the track, but it doesn't quite account for his crazy record. In Cars 3, it was noted that Doc didn't start out winning every race, but somehow he quickly rose to the top and began shattering records. And if that sounds fishy, it's because it most likely is, and it could mean that Doc allowed fraud to play a role in his winnings as a racer, which would put a depressing watermark over his glory days. In Cars 3, it was pointed out by Doc's former racing friends that the Hudson Hornet lost a ton of races before he started winning. This even included Louise Nash, aka Barnstormer. Hudson lost to Nash 3 times in a row before suddenly being able to beat her consistently in races and then quickly continuing on to become the Piston Cup champion. According to this theory, the sudden success that Doc saw didn't quite come out of nowhere. Instead, it's more likely that the Hudson Hornet was working with experimental or even illegal parts that gave him an edge over the competition. And after feeling what it was like to finally be considered a winner, Doc only continued to cheat his way to the top without anyone being the wiser, at least not at first. Eventually, Doc's history would catch up to it and end up ruining the memories that should have been considered the Hudson Hornet's glory days. As Doc continued to try out illegal equipment to help him keep the title of champion, it would seem that he eventually got in over his head, and things went south really fast for the Hudson Hornet. As you know, the old racer's career ended on the day of his terrible crash at Fireball Beach in 1954. According to the movie, it took Doc a long time to recover from his injuries, and even then he was unable to return to the circuit. Now, they stated that this was because the world of racing had moved on without the Hudson Hornet, and he simply couldn't compete with the newer models of race cars. But some fans claim there might be a bit more to it than that. According to a fan theory, on the day of the crash at Fireball Beach, Doc was testing out some new gear that was supposed to improve his performance even more. And as you know, it did, because he ended up winning the race. However, because the Hudson Hornet wasn't used to handling that sort of speed yet, the race ultimately ended in a tragic accident that almost cost the racer his life. While that very well would have put an end to Doc Hudson's glory days, nothing could affect the race car as badly as if he were to be discovered as a cheater and a fraud. This is exactly what happened, at least according to this theory. You see, after the accident, Doc was likely worked on by other mechanics who would have seen the illegal parts that he was using. The doctors, or mechanics in this case, would be forced to report these illegal parts to the Racing Commission, theoretically revealing Doc's secret to the world. However, as the theory goes, the Racing Commission didn't want the bad publicity in a sport that was just starting to actually take off. So instead of telling the world that the famous Hudson Hornet was a cheater, the commission could have just forced Doc to retire, which he clearly did, leaving what was left of his glory days tarnished and far behind him. The only thing that Doc could do after being forced to retire out of shame would be to get a job out in the world. And according to this theory, he did what he knew best, which was working on cars. You see, if he was installing illegal parts onto himself, then Doc was clearly a skilled mechanic. So after ruining his career in racing by potentially using illegal parts to make him better than his competition, Doc decided to become a certified mechanic and help people in order to redeem his honor. This would be one of the few ways for him to ever legitimately be able to consider his tragic tragic and fraudulent past as glory days. Now, by this point in Doc's life, Doc ended up meeting the one car that he seemed to disdain above anyone else for no reason at all other than the fact that he was a race car. At least that's what Pixar wanted you to believe. Lightning McQueen showed up in Radiator Springs and experienced what most people would consider a horror movie. Think about it. You show up in a small, rundown town, then all of a sudden you're captured by its people, stuck there, and forced you to do manual labor while they all watch you in awe. That's horrifying. Not to mention the fact that the town's judge, Doc Hudson, seemed to hold a personal vendetta against Lightning even though the two had never met. Well, according to this theory, one of the major reasons that Doc hated McQueen right off the bat was because Lightning was a newer and faster model of race car, but even more so because he wasn't a fraud. And being a fraud is something that haunted Doc every day of his life, ever since his glory days and career as a racer ended. The Hudson Hornet couldn't stand the sight of Lightning McQueen, which is why he was about to be a terrible judge and let Lightning go free even though he basically destroyed the town. But when Sally suggested that he be forced to fix the road, Doc couldn't resist humiliating McQueen and making him suffer a bit. Seeing the speedy race car struggle made Doc feel less bad about being a fraud in the racing world, though he still couldn't look back on his glory days with honor. Interestingly enough, the old race car may have found what he considered to be the proper way to redeem himself by helping the same red car that he seemed to hate so much. Once Doc saw that Lightning McQueen was willing to put in the work to figure out how to make that high-speed turn at Willie's Butte, he started to see potential in the new racer. And even though Doc was the reason that the media found McQueen in Radiator Springs, after seeing how much of an impact Lightning had on the rest of the town, Doc might have figured the young race car could do the same for him. This is why at the end of the first Cars movie, the Hudson Hornet ultimately stepped up as McQueen's crew chief. He saw that Lightning was an honest racer, unlike Doc himself, according to the theory. And because of that, he figured that he could help Lightning win and maybe even break his record in a way that the Hudson Hornet never could. This would have been a way for Hudson to redeem himself from his fraudulent past in the racing world and maybe start to look back fondly on his glory days. Sadly, none of this was ever revealed due to Doc's unexpected death, which took place off-screen between Cars 1 and 2. However, if you look at the world around Cars, it does seem like he had to have seen some redemption for his past, even if he was once a cheater. Doc Hudson was given a memorial statue at his hometown racing track, Thomasville Speedway. Not only is that a sign that Doc had finally redeemed himself, but it's also a hint at the idea that he had something to be ashamed of in the first place. Otherwise, there's a good chance he would have already had a statue there, especially since he was a record holder who had to retire, supposedly due to a life-altering accident. On top of all that, the Piston Cup was also renamed in his honor, showing that he was fully accepted once again throughout the entire racing world and could finally move past his history. What do you think, though? Was Doc ashamed of his racing history because he didn't earn it in an honorable way? Or was he simply embarrassed for not being able to keep up in the racing industry? Make sure you let me know in the comments below.